Hello friends and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to show you how I painted these easy wet and wet transparent butterflies. So let's get started. I drew my butterflies in pencil on my Arches cold press watercolor block. Now to find the shapes for the butterflies, of course you can draw them out yourself, or if you go to a website like pixabay.com, you can find some photos or royalty-free illustrations, and you can just copy using, well, you can print it out and trace it onto your watercolor paper, or you can hold tracing paper up to your computer and trace it from there, and then from there you can get it onto your watercolor paper. If you have questions about this process of how to transfer from a reference to your watercolor paper, I'll be happy to share that in a future video. Just let me know in the comments. Anyway, I'm painting one butterfly at a time. I'm using just water to wet the paper. Now, what I love about good quality 100% cotton watercolor paper, especially Arches, is that once you get it wet, it stays wet for a really long time. So it makes it much easier to work with. So it gives you a little time to get your pigment and add it to these outer edges like I'm doing here. So you just wet the paper, drop in your pigment. I'm using a light blue. It's actually an Indanthrone blue, a really pretty shade of color by Daniel Smith. Anyway, so since the butterfly is all wet, I'm just adding this to the edge right where it meets the dry paper and letting it bleed or blend into that wet paper. I'm using the tip of my brush here and there to nudge it and push it around a bit as needed. And while that's still wet, I'll choose the center color and I'll start adding that in as well. So as the middle starts to dry, I can add a little bit more water just so I can keep it workable with the other colors that I need to use. I'm using a smaller brush now, and I'm using my deeper indigo color, and I'm painting the body of the butterfly. So the head and the bottom is going on dry paper, so it'll have that hard edge. But where it meets the wings, it's still wet, so it blurs out really nicely. And it just has a nice, easy, fresh, modern feel, letting it blend into that lighter blue color. I'm using some bright opera pink right outside that indigo color, letting it blend into the indigo on one side and into that wet paper on the other. It's all still nice and wet and workable. We don't want any hard edges inside our butterfly. Add a little bit more indigo just to kind of ease that transition a bit. Then on the dry paper, again using my detail brush, just adding the little antenna with indigo and filling it in. The wings are still nice and wet, and as it's drying, it's getting a little faded, so I want to drop in a little bit more of that blue color. I don't want to overwork it and overfuss, but I do want to have a little bit more deeper color. Here I'm adding a little bit more of that pink as well. As long as it's still wet, you can still make sure that the colors will blend very softly. And darkening those antennae a bit. Cleaning up the outer edge just a little with that indanthrone blue. I'm adding a little water here to kind of push the pigment towards the center. And a little deeper with that indigo in the center. Okay, we'll let that dry. We'll move on to our second butterfly. We'll do very similar. We're just going to wet the entire shape, and I chose a different shape butterfly just for fun and variety. And on this one, I'm going to use green and gold. So I'm using this green color. It's a really pretty warm grassy green. I'm not sure what the name is, but I'll put it in the video description. Same thing, just painting around the edge of the wings. Letting it flow right into that wet paper. Adding some water drops to kind of push the pigment around a bit. In this case, it's pushing it towards the edges. Now adding my indanthrone blue. I said green and gold earlier, but I meant green and blue. We'll do gold on the third butterfly. So on this one, I'm adding it towards the center of the body and on the tips of the wings. We'll get a really nice blue-green color where it meets that initial green layer. Also using indigo for the middle of this butterfly. It's just a really nice dark deep blue, and it tends to go well with most colors that I am using for these butterflies. So again, the head and the tail area are both on dry paper, so you have that nice hard edge. And in the middle, where it meets the watery paper, it blends out into that blue layer. And again, just doing my best to make matching antenna with the tip of my detail brush. You'll notice too that depending on how wet the paper is, as it starts to dry and it's not quite as wet as when you first add the green, whenever you add the colors, it doesn't travel as far. So this is a really nice time to get some more control in your blending and wet colors. So I'm adding a little bit more water to the tips here, towards the body, just kind of pushing the pigment around where I want it, which is primarily towards the edges, the tips, and the center. And I want the middle parts of the wings to be a bit lighter and more of that transparent effect. Alright, we'll let that dry and we'll move on to our last butterfly. Now this is the one that we're going to use some of that really pretty transparent gold color. Just like the other two, I'm going to wet the entire paper, the entire butterfly shape rather, and then start adding my colors, beginning with that quinacridone gold. Now I'm using phthalo blue towards the center of the body. When this color mixes with that quinacridone, it's a really pretty turquoisey color. I don't know if the camera is even capturing it, but if you have those colors, I encourage you to try them together because it's so pretty. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up, as this helps my small channel to grow and reach more watercolor enthusiasts like you. Also consider subscribing to my channel for more art tips, techniques, and tutorials. And if you'd like a free watercolor techniques e-guide plus video demonstration, then please visit my website createwithaura.com/free to get access to the guide, the video, and the line art gallery. I'll also have that link in the video description. Until next time, happy painting!